All right. Now we have screen share going, so we can resume. You know, they say that you can cure 90% of all computer problems by turning it off and starting it up again. So I guess that's true. Mark's ending of the discourse, Jesus tells him to be careful, keep watch. We don't know when he'll be coming back. And Jesus said that no one knows when the Son of Man is coming. And then we have Luke's ending of the discourse. Again, a call to watch and to be careful. The need for watchfulness. This comes from Matthew chapter 24. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at a handmill. One will be taken and the other left. On this, what do you think is the meaning of Jesus saying one will be taken and the other left?
Sure.
Yes.
Maybe the emphasis is on the people taken. Like how the flood came and took them all away. It'll be like the people that is taken away. Not actually meaning in a good way.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe.
Just a second. I'm trying to get this other computer. Okay, here we go. Okay. So before the flood, it's going to be like the coming of the Son of Man. We need to be careful, and because they didn't know when the flood was coming, and we don't know when the Son of Man is coming. What about the two men will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. Two women will be grinding at a hand mill, one will be taken and the other left. What do you think that means?
So in our country, when we listen to the preaching, it does not have the good sense, like how should I say, like the person who will be taken away, they believe like they will be taken by God, they will be with God. So the person who is left here has no hope like that, sir. So that's why, like, oftentimes I heard them say, it's better to taken away. If you live here, so you will be here, we will be all going to heaven. So it's kind of like the, how should I say, like I don't know the specific word. It's kind of like you are going alive, like just like the resurrection, or like just like Elijah and Enoch, like that, like the coming of Christ, and then something like that.
Yeah. In my case,
Yeah,
yes, we must be prepared for the sudden day when Jesus coming here. We think we just somebody's salvation is very easy, but whole context, if it's the whole context, Jesus needed to prepare the person, especially the bride for the bridegroom and many. So here, even though we are living in common life, but among them, one part is the prepared for entering the kingdom of heaven, and another part is cannot be prepared. So in this case, I think we must be prepared for entering the kingdom of heaven.
All right. Thank you, Masha. Karen, what you were talking about, we would call the rapture,
Oh, yes, sir.
the rapture of the saints. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
That's how they link this sermon to the rapture.
Okay, yeah. So there are two people, and when the Lord comes back, one will be gone and the other will be left behind. Right? How many of you have heard these verses preached that way? Can I see your hand? Okay, almost everybody. And that is the way it's generally understood. And I think that that's what Jesus was saying, that he is going away, but he's going to come back, the Son of Man. And when the Son of Man comes back, he will take those who are his, and the others will be left behind. And think of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where he talks about the coming of the Son of Man. Paul is talking about Jesus' second coming, and will be caught up with the Lord in the air. And I think that's probably the correct interpretation of what Jesus is saying here. I have mentioned several times N.T. Wright's unique, maybe not totally unique, but at least maybe a little unorthodox view of this, at least according to typical evangelical understanding. And he says that what this is talking about is not the second coming of Christ, but the coming of the Romans to destroy Jerusalem. So he interprets all this that we've been looking at, solely in terms of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So the one who comes and takes these people away is not the Lord, but it's the Roman soldiers. The one who is taken is destroyed by the Romans, and the one who is left is saved. Not saved spiritually, but he's not destroyed by the Romans. Now, I have never heard that preached anywhere, and but that is Wright's position. And we need to be familiar with Wright because he is today the most influential New Testament scholar in the world. So we need to be at least familiar with that. Do you have any questions or comments here before we go on?
Yeah. So can I kind of like have I don't understand how he likened it to the flood. When he said that it's like the flood. When the flood comes, it'll take away. And I don't know how to link that with what he said. It will take away the people, meaning that those people were drowned and were killed. How would you?
Well, he interprets that in terms of Jerusalem in AD 70. You know, they were hoping that they were going to be successful in rebelling against the Romans. And I'm sure that there were people there who were still marrying and giving in marriage, you know, and having their parties and all that kind of thing, as if everything is just going to go on as normal. But then the Romans descend and it's over, you know, just like the flood. And thousands of people lost their lives when the Romans captured Jerusalem. And so he interprets it solely historically, first century. And he doesn't see it as referring to the second coming of Christ. Now, he does say in his little commentary on Matthew for Everyone, that since this is the way things happened in the first century, that when Christ comes back, there could be parallels, you know, in those events. And so he's open to the idea of may be seeing as a secondary meaning here, the second coming. But he doesn't see it as a primary meaning. And I think probably most of us would disagree with Wright on that. Now, in talking about this, we're getting a little off life of Christ and more on teachings of Christ, but hopefully that's okay. Now, if we go to the next, yes, Masha?
Why N.T. Wright think like that here clearly at the coming of the Son of Man? This is Jesus teaching about his coming again. The 39 there is. By the way, why he doesn't think about he
Yes.
think about Roman.
Well, that's a good point. How can this be the coming of the Son of Man? And also, in Matthew, the issue is not just when is the temple going to be destroyed, but it's the end of the age as well. So, yeah, I think Wright would have to give some explanation there. Because in Mark, you could interpret it in terms simply of the destruction of the temple. But in Matthew, the disciples' question was about the end of the age as well. So that doesn't seem to fit with it simply being the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem in AD 70. So that's a good question, Masha. Maybe if N.T. Wright comes to do our lectureship sometime, we can ask him.
So, just a question though.
Yes.
Is it right for me to say that, like, you know how N.T. Wright is the most influential NT theologian? Is it right for me to say that even if it doesn't matter if you're influential, it does not mean that your doctrine is sound?
That's right. That's right. Well, in the 20th century, for much of the 20th century, the most influential theologian was Rudolf Bultmann. And none of us would agree with Rudolf Bultmann because he was very much a liberal. And so at least now, the most influential one is an evangelical, even though we would disagree with him on many things, and this is one of them. At least he's an evangelical and believes in salvation and, you know, that kind of thing. So no, because he's the most influential doesn't mean that he's right. N.T. Wright is an excellent scholar, a genius. He is also a spiritual man, you know, he speaks in tongues. And he is I think he's a good friend of ours. He's a good scholar, but there are some major places where I disagree with him. And he says that 85% of what he teaches is correct, that 15% is wrong. The problem is he doesn't know which is the 85 and which is the 15. He says, although I could give him some suggestions on that. Yeah. Any other questions or comments before we go on?
Sir, we hear little bit disturbances in your voice, sir.
Oh, really? The voice is breaking up. Okay, hold on just a second. I'll get on my headphones.
I just went on the internet. Would that have done it?
Okay, I don't think so.
Can you hear me? Okay, sounds good? Okay. Okay, we have the watchful householder here. We'll just go on. The faithful and wise servant. Basically the same theme that we've been dealing with. We have the parable of the 10 maidens. And again, all of this is being watchful, being ready for the coming, and we would interpret that the second coming of Christ. This is the maidens at the wedding who have lamps and they let the oil run out. And while they are going to get more oil, the bridegroom comes and they are not then allowed into the wedding feast. And Jesus said, therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day, or the hour. Now again, let me just give you a quote from N.T. Wright. In Matthew, the other parables in chapter 25 are focused not on the personal return of Jesus after a long interval in which the church is left behind, but on the great judgment which is coming very soon upon Jerusalem and her current leaders, and which signals the vindication of Jesus and his people as the true Israel. There is, of course, a time lag to be undergone, but it's not the one normally imagined. It is not the gap between Jesus going away and his personal return, the coming of the Son of Man in the literalistic, non-Danielic sense. It is the time lag envisioned in Matthew 24 between the ministry of Jesus and the destruction of Jerusalem. This time lag will be a period in which, in Jesus' absence, his followers will be open prey to the deceit of false messiahs and will face a period of great suffering before the vindication draws. So that is again, just giving N.T. Wright's position. And again, by giving his position, that doesn't mean that I am endorsing it. The parable of the talents, again, being faithful in the absence of the master. And then the last judgment in Matthew 25, 31 to 46. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for the one of the least of these, you did not do for me. So here we have a picture of the last judgment. How are we to interpret this? And let me give you 4 ways that this is normally interpreted. First of all, The least of these brothers of mine refers to any who are in need. By caring for them, we receive salvation. This amounts to justification by works. We are justified by what we do. Second, the least of these brothers of mine refers to any who are in need. The person does not earn salvation by caring for them, but cares for them as a result of their relationship with God. The third interpretation, which most evangelicals hold to, is that the least of these brothers of mine refers to Christians who take the message of the kingdom. So it is those who receive, those who are taking that message, and at the same time, they are receiving the message as well and having faith in Christ. And so that would be the least of these brothers of mine. And then fourth, the dispensationalists believe that it is the judgment of the nations on how they have treated the Jews. So it says here, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from the other as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So the nations, according to the dispensationalists, will be divided. So there will be sheep nations and goat nations, depending on how you have treated the Jewish people. Like I said, most evangelical scholars believe that number 3 is correct, that the least of these brothers of mine refers to Christians who take the message of the kingdom. Do you have questions or comments on this? All right. And then in Luke, we have a summary of the days spent in Jerusalem. So if we have no questions here, we will go on. Okay. All right. And let me get my notes up. All right. We're going to continue then going through Jesus last week. We have done Sunday with the triumphal entry, Monday and Tuesday, and now we are going to Wednesday. We have, first of all, the conspiracy against Jesus. Now, the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. And then the anointing at Bethany. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing for me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on her body, on my body, beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Now, here Jesus is in Bethany at the home of Simon the leper. Jesus is the guest of honor. Mary leaves the room, and then she comes back and does something which is significant for two reasons. First of all, it is a prophecy about Jesus' mission. And secondly, it is the extravagance of her action. Mary anointed Jesus' body. Now, Christ or Messiah means anointed one. This was an anointing by an obscure woman, Mary. Now, this is a secondary anointing. Of course, the Messiah is the one anointed to be king of Israel, the descendant of David. But he is anointed in another way. He is the Messiah, the anointed one, the Christ, in another way, because this lady is anointing him. This woman prepared Jesus' body ahead of time for the burial, he said. Could it be that she was the first human being other than Jesus to realize that the Messiah, the anointed one, was going to suffer and die? Did she know that it would happen? Did she realize the significance of her actions? Whether she did or not, she truly gave insight into Jesus' person and mission. Now, we have this recorded in three of the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and John. And we're looking at it in Mark, but John also gives us insight here, like that it was Mary that did the anointing. Women in first century Jewish culture were not highly esteemed. A Jewish man every day would thank God that he was not born a slave, a Gentile, or a woman. Usually women in the first century were illiterate. And so we have a woman here who is possibly illiterate, untrained, female, and yet she does something that no one else does. She has insight that no one else has, and that is she is preparing Jesus ahead of time for his burial. And then look at the extravagance of what she did. The bottle of anointment which she poured over Jesus cost a year's wages. Now realize what a year's wages would be in your culture. That was a very expensive heirloom. And the response to her actions from Jesus, it was appreciation. From the disciples, it was consternation. They, led by Judas, grumbled that the ointment could have been sold and given to the poor. Of course, Judas wasn't so interested in the poor. He was interested in himself. These disciples, it seems, were practical. No successful husband thinks that gifts have to be practical. Since when is love practical? Since when is love rational? A lot of times love is extravagantly irrational. This woman did this as an act of love. Was it foolish? Well, to some people, to the CPA who has out his pencil adding up, everything that this would buy, yeah, it's impractical. It shouldn't have been done, he would say. He's throwing away money. But for her, it was an act of love. And giving is a natural response of love. And notice here that Jesus said she did what she could. She did what she could. This is something that God will ask of us. It is what we can. God will never ask of us to do what we cannot do, at least what we cannot do with his power, his help. She did what she could. That is all Jesus would expect from her, and it's all that he expects from any of us. He asks us to do what we can. There are some things that we can't do, and we need to realize that. But he asks us to do what we can, and we need to do what we can. Okay, do you have questions or comments here about the anointing of Jesus? Now, remember that we looked at the lady in Luke, I think it was chapter 9, if I remember right, who anointed Jesus' feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Now, I believe this is a different incident. So it is not that one that we found there in Luke, because there's too much different from that. But I believe that these in Matthew, Mark, and John refer to the same incident. Any questions or comments? All right. Next, we have the betrayal of Jesus. Here, Judas goes to the Jewish leaders and plans to turn Jesus over to them for money. And now we come to Maundy Thursday. This was the day of the Last Supper. And we have preparation for the Passover. On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, "Where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, 'The teacher asked, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He will show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." The disciples left, went into the city, and found things just as Jesus had told them. So they prepared the Passover. So here we see that Jesus told the disciples to ask a man, "Where is my guest room?" And the word is kataluma. It is the word translated in the infancy narratives. He had arranged for a large upper room to be ready for him and his disciples to celebrate the Passover. So Jesus has already planned for this. He's made arrangements. Just like the donkey that Jesus rode on in the triumphal entry. So Jesus has made prior preparations for this. Jesus must have already had some relationship to the owners of the home. Remember that in Acts 12, after Peter is miraculously released from jail, he went to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark. Is that the John Mark that wrote the gospel? Was John Mark's family somehow associated with Jesus even at this time? Now, where was the physical location of the Last Supper? And possibly the site of the infilling of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost. That also was in a large upper room. If you go to Jerusalem, you'll be told that the upper room is at a place called the Cenacle. Not the word cynical, like, a person is cynical. He's a cynic. It's a different word. Along with the tomb of David, they believe that those two things are together. Well, it's definitely not the tomb of David. The Old Testament tells us that David was buried in the city of David, which is at a different location. But here are the pictures of the Cenacle. This large building that is identified as the place of the upper room. And here's the sign that you see out front when you go there: Room of the Last Supper, a hall built in the Middle Ages at the place where, according to Christian tradition, Jesus partook of the Passover Eve meal with his disciples just before the crucifixion. And this is a picture of the inside of the Cenacle. The question is this the place where Jesus had his Last Supper? Well, the answer to that is no, and possibly. The building itself is from a much later period, probably the 1300s. Jerome O'Connor says, nothing visible has the slightest claim to authenticity. However, there is tradition going back to the 1st century that it could be the site of the Last Supper. So we can say that the location may be authentic, but the building is not the building in which Jesus had the Last Supper. So if you go to Jerusalem and they take you to the upper room and you go here, realize that geographically, this may be the location of where the upper room was, but this is not the upper room that you are in. This came, 1,300 years later. Okay? Questions, comments? All right. The washing of the disciples' feet. John 13, 1-20. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up after the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And my alarm is going off here. Let me just finish reading this and then we'll take a break. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am." Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example for you, example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill the passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. I am telling you now before this happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am who I am. Very truly, I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, and we will come back after that. All right. Up until right before this, in the Gospel of John, it said his hour had not yet come, or he says, my hour has not yet come. But here in verse 1, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world. So the hour here has come. And there's again a change in tone here. So this would be the last night that Jesus would have with the disciples before his death. And he chose to spend that night with his friends. Those 12 men, John says, were Jesus' own. They were his own. They were united to him in a bond of love. And says John, Jesus loved them to the utmost limits of love. John tells us that while they were there together at that last meal, and by the way, it is in the context of a meal, which we know from the synoptics was what we call the Last Supper. We're not really told about the Last Supper in detail, but we are told about what Jesus did, washing the disciples' feet, and then the teaching that he gave in chapters 14, 15, 16, and 17 of John. John tells us that Jesus knew three things. First of all, that Judas Iscariot was at least toying with the idea of betraying him. So the traitor was in the midst there. That the Father had given all things into Jesus' hands. And then that Jesus had come from God and was going to God. Jesus knew these three things. Jesus saw that valley of the shadow of death that he would have to go through. But more importantly, he saw the mountain of glory on the other side and was willing to do that for us. Notice that Jesus mentions the supper here. Even though he doesn't describe, or excuse me, John mentions the supper. Even though he doesn't describe it, it was the Last Supper as recorded in the synoptics. Jesus rose, laid aside his garments. Now, it was customary for a man to wear a tunic and over it a cloak. It says in the NIV that he laid aside his outer garment, but in the Greek, it is in the plural. It is garments. He probably took off both his cloak and his tunic and wore only his loincloth, the clothing of a slave. John doesn't tell us what the topic of conversation was up to that point, but Luke tells us that at the meal, the disciples had been arguing about who was the greatest. And Luke tells us that Jesus told them, the Gentiles lord it over others. But he said, you should not be like that. And the greatest among you should be like the youngest, and the one who rules like the one who serves. But not only did Jesus tell them that with words, he enacted a parable before them. Jesus wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet and to dry them with a towel. Now, washing someone else's feet was one of the most demeaning acts in Jesus' day. Normally, each person washed his own feet when they entered a home after walking in sandals over the dusty roads. To have one's feet washed for him was something that was not expected. In fact, the one who would do that would be a Hebrew slave. And here Jesus takes the basin and the towel and begins to wash the disciples' feet. And then he gets to Peter, and there the silence is broken. Peter, in shocked amazement, says, "Do you think I'm going to let you wash my feet?" Jesus tells Peter to bear with him and he will understand it all later. But Peter responds in very strong language and says, "No, you shall never wash my feet." And then Jesus, in his gentle way, replies, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." And Peter, not wanting to go halfway, says enthusiastically, "Then, Lord, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus replies that the person who has had a bath needs only to wash his feet. The image there is one of one who goes to a feast. He bathes before he goes, so that when he arrives, only his feet needs washing. So Peter, first of all, tells Jesus to do that he's doing too much, and then he tells him that he's doing too little. The temptation is always to tell Jesus what he ought to do, not patiently waiting until we understand. But Jesus did not simply wash the disciples' feet on an impulse as something nice to do. There was something far greater that motivated Jesus. He said, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." What is the meaning of this teaching? Jesus says that we should wash one another's feet. Now, for most people in our societies today, that would be a strange thing to do. And really, it would be quite meaningless in most of our societies. Today, we don't usually walk down dusty roads in sandals. And this was written before there were socks and hose that men and women wear today. How many of you have been to a foot washing ceremony? Can I see your hand if you've been to a foot washing ceremony? 1, 2, yeah, a couple of you have. Excuse me. Some churches still do that today, and I have been to foot washings. I've never actually partaken in one. I practiced in one, but when I was a kid, I would go to fellowship meetings with my parents, and they would have foot washings. And I only have one question. When those services happen, did anybody come with dirty feet? I doubt it. I'm sure that they all washed their feet really clean before they came, so they would know that when somebody washed their feet, that they would already be clean. It'd be embarrassing to actually come with dirty feet. You know, I think today it's possible to keep the ceremony, but completely miss what Jesus intended. John Calvin, the great reformer of the 16th century, describing certain men who kept the ceremony, but knew nothing of the spirit of the ceremony, said this, and let me do the screen share here. He says, besides, when they ought to have followed Christ, they were not imitators, but apes. Every year they have a fashion of washing some people's feet as if it were a farce which they were playing on the stage. And so when they have performed this idle and unmeaning ceremony, they think that they have fully discharged their duty and reckon themselves at liberty to despise their brethren during the rest of the year. But what is far worse, after having washed the feet of 12 men, they subject every member of Christ to cruel torture and thus spit in Christ's face. This display of buffoonery, therefore, is nothing else than a shameful mockery of Christ. At all events, Christ does not here enjoin an annual ceremony, but bids us be ready throughout the whole life to wash the feet of our brethren and neighbors. Christ, in telling us to wash each other's feet, was telling us in a way that is appropriate to the cultural setting to serve one another rather than to be served. Now, what would be the equivalent of washing someone's feet in your culture? How could you do something like Jesus is talking about in a way in your culture that is culturally appropriate?
Actually,
Yes.
like I experienced the feet washing like when we were very young. Like it's not like they don't do it inside the churches, though they preach, but we don't do it. But when we are in Sunday school or like in like youth fellowship, they teach us. So in our country, like washing feet is like, how should I say, like we prefer when anybody comes from outside, like the first thing we need to do is to wash our feet so that we can clean all the dirt that we have carried from outside. So yeah, that's the case, sir. But we don't think like it's something like how should I say, like if we wash our face, like it's not something we are making ourselves humble. But if we are washing other feet, it's like we are showing them respect, like something like that, sir.
Karen, so when somebody in your culture goes
sir.
into someone's home, do they wash their own feet, or do the people in the house wash the feet for them?
Actually, sir, before when I was very young, I remember like we used to give them water so that they can wash their own feet. But nowadays, because of time has changed, so we don't usually do such kind of things. But I remember when I was little, we used to serve water and then like the bucket with water and then jug. So they will wash their feet outside of the house and then they will come inside. But nowadays, these things we cannot see in this. So, so that's the case right now, sir.
All right, good. Thank you, Karen. How
Yes,
about the
in
rest
Korea,
of you? Yes, Masha.
yes. in Korea, when I was young, there was no custom. But when I see the movie and I read the historical book, the slaves wash the high people, their owner like that.
Mhm.
But these days, I think there is no. But in my case here, it's opposite meaning. Here, 16. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is messenger greater than the one who sent him. It's, by the way, the master is washing their disciples. So I think
Yes.
it looks like the parents, my mothers, my fathers washing our feet because they are my protector. They are my keeping something. So if we see the context of Jesus' teaching, the master, the greater people must wash somebody's cleanse. That is really great being. Not be served, but you
All
must
right.
serve like this. I
All
think
right.
so.
Great. Thank you, Masha. Okay, let me ask you all, what is the point that Jesus is making by washing the disciples' feet? Now, we've had the women share with us. What about you guys? What is the point that Jesus is making when he washes the disciples' feet?
The leaders, the masters, the one who have power, the one who have authority must serve the weak people, poor people, sinners.
Okay.
This
Okay.
is the ruling way of the kingdom of God
All right.
in the
Good.
church.
Good. Thank you. Now, let me ask you,
You hear me, sir?
if that is the point of the this enacted parable that Jesus did, how do we translate that into our culture, into your culture?
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, Peter.
I was going to add, like, for our culture, we don't have any washing of feet, but what's equivalent? Probably the chiefs in the family and the pastors are held in high esteem. So maybe in the family itself, when you have someone in the family, the father or the chief, maybe if the children see him go and wash the dishes,
Okay.
that would be equivalent to that. Or maybe one day when the church have a feast and they see the pastor serving the people, maybe that would be one of the equivalent to that. Because in our culture, the pastors, they are treated and the chiefs are treated like kings.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I think that would be an equivalent. So I think for our people, if they all of a sudden they see a pastor or a chief serving, it would be like, wow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Good. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, that sounds like a good equivalent of washing the feet. What about the rest of you? What about in your culture? Can you come up with an equivalent here of servanthood that Jesus is talking about? Jason?
In our country, we do some farm works for others because most of us are farmers. So that's an important sign.
All right. Okay. Okay. I was at a meeting of ministers in Springfield, Missouri, and it was actually called by the general superintendent of the Assemblies of God. And at that time, a man by the name of G. Raymond Carlson was the general superintendent of the Assemblies of God in the USA. And we had a nice meal together. And toward the end of the meal, he got up and went into the kitchen and came back out with a pot of coffee, and he served coffee to all of the ministers. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. This is the general superintendent, the most powerful Assembly of God person in the world. And here he comes and he serves me coffee. I was so impressed. And also a few years ago at our graduation at APTS, after the banquet, there was a lot of cleanup to do. We had to take dishes to the kitchen and clean the tables off and all that kind of thing. And one of the people who stayed and did that was the general superintendent from Korea. And I was just amazed, you know. He stayed there with us. He took dirty dishes to the kitchen. He helped. And I thought, man, this is amazing, you know. He really has a servant's heart. And but maybe those kinds of things are the kinds of things that Jesus is talking about. Be willing to serve others. Be willing to, in a culturally appropriate way, wash each other's feet. And it's important that we do that. We don't stand on a pedestal and have people praise us. We don't try to wield power, but we serve. And that's what Jesus says time and time again. Any other questions or comments here? All right.
So
Yes.
briefly, I wanted to understand where Monday come from.
Maundy Thursday. Oh, that is a good question. And I have looked that up before, but I have forgotten where that comes from, that word. Hold on just a second. Let me see if I can see that here. Yes, it goes back to the washing of the disciples' feet. And it actually is related to the word mandate, command. And I suppose that it was the command of Jesus to do that, that probably is where the word Maundy Thursday comes from. That is not something that we are familiar with in our tradition, at least in the Assemblies of God. That is not part of our vocabulary. And so it's a different kind of thing. Dickie, what about the Baptists? Dickie says the Baptists don't use that terminology either. It would be more the high church, Episcopal, Anglican, Catholic, that would use the term Maundy Thursday. All right. Yes.
I look for this. The Thursday before Easter is known as either Monday, Thursday, or Holy Thursday. Monday is derived from the Latin words of command and refers to Jesus commanded to disciples to love one another, each another like this.
Okay. Good. Thank you. We're learning together. All right. The traitor, Jesus said, one of you is going to betray me. And they ask, is it I who is going to do it? And then we have the institution of the Lord's Supper. Sometimes we may think that the elements of the Lord's Supper may be a little strange. passing cups and breaking unleavened bread, we may think surely the disciples knew that something special was happening. I mean, you don't just pass cups of wine around and eat unleavened bread every day. Surely they knew that something special was going to be happening in that supper. But actually, the disciples saw little, if anything, special because they did this every year. They were well aware, they were well familiar with this ceremony that they were going through. So, you know, it would be like in America, every Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, you open presents around the Christmas tree. That's just something that you do. You know, it's an American tradition. Now, I don't know what you would have in your country that every year you would do, but this is something that the Jews did every Passover. And so if we were entering into that situation, we would say, man, this is really unusual. Something really special is going on here. But the disciples, for them, it's just ordinary. We do it every year. And so they did not see something special in it the way we think they ought to. Now, the Passover meal itself was made up of several different parts. There was the preliminary course, and here we have the word of dedication, the blessing of the feast day and of the cup. It was spoken by the head of the house over the first cup, called the Kadush or sanctification cup. And then they had a preliminary dish. This is all under the preliminary course. It consisted of things like green herbs, bitter herbs, and a sauce that was made from fruit puree. And then the meal proper is served, but not yet eaten. The second cup is mixed and put in its place, but it's not yet drunk. Then we have the Passover liturgy, the Passover Haggadah, which is the Jewish interpretation of the scripture, was read by the head of the house in Aramaic. And there was a singing of the first part of the Passover Hallel. Psalms 113 and 114 were sung in Hebrew. And then there was the drinking of the second cup, the Haggadah cup. And then we had the main meal. Grace was spoken by the head of the house over the unleavened bread. And there is the meal consisting of the Passover lamb, unleavened bread, bitter herbs with the fruit puree and wine. And then grace is said over the third cup, the cup of blessing. And then there is the conclusion, which is the second part of the Passover Hallel, Psalm 115 to 118, sung in Hebrew, and then praise over the fourth cup, called the Hallel cup. The breaking of the bread by Jesus would have happened during the meal here in this ceremony. And the cup that Jesus passed was the third cup, taken after the meal, which is also called the cup of blessing. In fact, the Apostle Paul calls the cup of communion the cup of blessing in 1 Corinthians 10:16. It was all very familiar to the disciples. So like I said, you know, they've done this every year of their lives. So the context of the Last Supper was ordinary. What set it apart was some special words and a special person. And those words and that person made this ordinary meal into one of the most extraordinary meals in history. For there the Son of God foretold his death and ratified God's new covenant with mankind by taking ordinary bread and ordinary wine. But the disciples completely missed the significance of what was happening. You know, like the Jews wanting a supernatural sign, the ordinariness of this meal blinded the eyes of the disciples. They were blinded to the specialness of what was happening right before their eyes. No sooner had Jesus finished these words than the disciples began arguing over who was the greatest in the kingdom of God. They were so self-centered, they had no idea of the importance of what they were witnessing. It reminds me of the story of a school class, little kids. They went on a field trip to a fire station, and they saw the big fire engine, you know, the big truck that goes out to the fire. They saw where the firemen slept and the pole that they slid down when suddenly they would get the message there's a fire. They would go, they would slide down the pole, jump in the truck and take off. They saw all of this magnificent stuff. And the teacher then asked the students, do you have any questions? And one student raised her hand, and the teacher called on her, and her question was, did you notice my new dress? Now, wait a minute. We're here looking at all this stuff, this fire engine, all this exciting stuff. But here she is, totally absorbed in herself. Well, that reminds me of the way the disciples were when they were seeing some of the most significant things in the history of the world. They were blinded to it because they were so self-absorbed. Masha, did you have a question?
Yes. Is there any relevance, the reason why Jesus died on the Passover day? It is a symbolization of atoning sacrifice.
I believe so.
Huh?
I believe so. I believe that there
okay.
is that symbolic. Jesus was our perfect Passover lamb.
So now his body and is the Passover meal to us.
Yes, in a sense. He said, this cup is my blood, the bread is my body. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
so yeah, there is symbolism there. You know, I think that if I had been Jesus and these disciples were there arguing over who's going to be greatest in the kingdom, when they are in their last meal with Jesus, he's doing something very significant. I think if I were Jesus, I would have said, I give up. I'm tired of casting my pearls before swine. It's no use trying to communicate with these men. I quit. That's what I think I would have thought. You see, God had come in the ordinary events of life, at least on the surface, they seemed ordinary, and these men were not aware of it. And I believe that that's often the way God comes to us. In what seems to be so ordinary in life, if we only knew God was doing great and life-changing things, if we only had eyes to see. You know, Jesus approached Jerusalem in the triumphal entry, and he looked over the city and he said, if you, even you, had only known, if you had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But they didn't know. They were blind to it. The disciples, if they had only known what was happening right then, their attitude would have been so much different. At that Last Supper, Peter said that he would go with Christ to prison and to death. But Christ said Peter would deny him. And maybe Peter envisioned a spectacular confrontation between him and the Jewish leaders, and he would boldly stand for Christ, and that kind of thing. But that's not the way it happened. It was in front of a lowly servant girl, and he failed. And if we fail, it's probably not going to be in the context of some great something covered on television or the headlines of newspapers. It's probably going to be in the humdrum routine of life, for it's there that our lives are made or broken. Jesus took the familiar unleavened bread and broke it and gave it out. He took the familiar cup and passed it to his disciples. The world would never be the same. He said, "This bread is my body." He said, "This cup is my blood, which is shed for you." Listen to the words that were on Jesus' lips, because they sang the Hallel, the 118th Psalm. And let me just read to you some of those verses there. And look at the irony of what goes on here. It says, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. He brought me into a spacious place. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I will look in triumph on my enemies. I will not die, but live. I will proclaim what the Lord has done. The Lord has chastened me severely, but he has not given me over to death. I will give you thanks, for you answered me. You have become my salvation. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. The Lord has done it this very day. Let us rejoice and be glad. Lord, save us. Hosanna. Lord, grant us success. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. From the house of the Lord, we bless you. The Lord is God. He has made his light shine on us. With bows in hand, we join in the festal procession up to the horns of the altar. You are our God, and I will praise you. You are my God, and I will exalt you. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. And with these words of praise and supplication, Jesus begins the final leg of his journey that will lead him to the cross. The paradox here: give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? I will not die, but live, and will proclaim what the Lord has done. Let us rejoice today and be glad. How could a God of love, a heavenly Father, allow his Son to go through the agony of Calvary? The God who would spare his children no good thing, who welcomes the wayward home and provides for the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, where was he when all of this was happening? Jesus realized full well that there are some cups that we have to drink, some responsibilities that we have to accept. He didn't want to sacrifice his life's blood, but he decided and determined to do it because it needed to be done. It illustrates the principle of joy comes through pain. the writer of Hebrews tells us that for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He quoted from the Psalms 2 more times after he sung the Hallel. On the cross, he quoted Psalm 22:1, my God, why have you forsaken me? And here we feel the utter abandonment that Christ felt on the cross. And then he quoted Psalm 31:5, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so the paradox is, through hardship and through pain, God's joy is experienced. So Jesus was determined to do what God wanted. It was incredibly painful that probably words cannot express. Not only painful from a physical standpoint, but a spiritual standpoint of separation from the Father, of bearing the sins of the world. And yet he did it for the joy that was set before him. So here we see Jesus' character shining forth. It takes people of character to do what is unpleasant. Jesus did what was extremely hard. He took his responsibility. He made the right choices, and the result was our salvation and eternal joy. Do you have questions or comments here? All right. Now in our outline, we have primarily the teaching from the book of John. And we're not going to go into that because we're not primarily talking about Jesus' teaching unless you have a particular question about any of these. The new commandment to love, the way to Gethsemane, Peter's denial prophesied, the two swords, let not your hearts be troubled, John 14, the promise of the Paraclete, the gift of peace, Jesus the true vine, abide in my love, the world's hatred, the witness of the Paraclete, on persecution, the work of the Paraclete, sorrow turned to joy, prayer in the name of Jesus, the prediction of the disciples' flight, the intercessory prayer, the great high priestly prayer of John 17, and then Jesus in Gethsemane. So next time we will begin here with Jesus in Gethsemane. Do you have any questions or comments before we close tonight's session?
Yeah, I just want to ask, I want to understand that meaning of the two swords.
Okay, let's go back up there. Let me just go there and look at the scripture. Okay, then Jesus asked them, when I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Nothing, they answered. He said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, take your cloak and buy one. It is written, and he was numbered with the transgressors. I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what was written about me is reaching to fulfillment. The disciples said, see, Lord, we have two swords. That is enough, he replied. I wish I could tell you why he told them to take swords. Now we're going to see in the Garden of Gethsemane that Peter has one of those swords, and he cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. And Jesus tells him to put away the sword, because those who take the sword will die by the sword. He is reversing the mandate that he gave when he sent them out early in his ministry, when he gave them authority over evil spirits and authority to heal. Jesus did not have a ministry of violence. And so why it is like this here, I just can't say. Does anybody have any idea that may be helpful here? Why would Jesus tell them to have swords? Yeah. Maybe we can go into that further and see if we can come up with an answer there. Okay. Next time we will begin at Jesus in Gethsemane. All right. God bless you. And we will see you on Friday morning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Take
Professor.
care. Thank you all.
Thank you.